It's late. The screen glows. You've been scrolling for 47 minutes, maybe more. You're not sad exactly, but not alive either. Just here. You tap, swipe, skim, laugh. You switch apps, open new tabs, start a message, delete it, check the time again, and beneath it all, like a dull hum behind the glass, a feeling you can't quite name. You're not alone. But you feel deeply disconnected from others, from yourself, from whatever life used to mean. Zygmunt Bauman called this world we live in liquid modernity, a world in motion. Endlessly fast, endlessly flexible, endlessly optimized. Nothing is built to last, not jobs, not relationships, not identities, not even emotions. Everything flows, but nothing holds. In the past, life was heavy, rooted, solid. There were paths, there were roles, there was struggle, yes, but also structure. You were a farmer, a priest, a shoemaker, a mother, a citizen, and, whether you liked it or not, you belonged somewhere. Now, you're everything and nothing, a freelancer, a brand, a profile, a work in progress, a story you keep rewriting this time before it even begins. You can swipe through 100 potential lovers in a night, but still feel completely untouched. You can have hundreds of followers and no one to call when you're really falling apart. You can be productive, attractive, liked, and high-functioning, and still whisper to yourself, why does none of this feel real? This is the crisis of modern life. Not that we don't have enough, but that everything we do have slips through our fingers, because it was never meant to stay. Bauman saw it decades before it became obvious. He warned that the modern world was melting, not into chaos, but into a kind of seductive, smiling emptiness, where depth is replaced with speed, where commitment is seen as risk, where freedom means floating, but also drowning. And that ache you feel late at night, that tension between movement and meaninglessness, that's not failure, it's not depression, it's not even loneliness. It's the echo of a soul trying to anchor itself in a world that keeps insisting, don't stop, don't feel, don't settle, just keep going. So in this video, we're not going to talk about dopamine detoxes or productivity hacks. We're going to do something more radical. We're going to listen to that emptiness, to that flicker of unease, to that question beneath the surface. If everything flows, what is worth holding on to? Because maybe modern life feels so empty not because we're broken, but because something in us is still whole and it's waiting, not for more options, but for something real. In a world that never stops moving, the greatest ache isn't pain, it's emptiness. We live in an era of unprecedented freedom. You can be whoever you want, live wherever you like, change your job, your name, your face. And yet, behind all, that freedom is a subtle, paralyzing truth. Nothing feels built to last, and because of that, nothing feels real. This is the heart of Zygmunt Bauman's warning. He called it liquid modernity, a phase of modern life where everything solid melts. Structures, temporary, relationships, disposable, identities, fluid, endlessly customizable. Morality, personalized, community, replaced by followers. Bauman didn't say this with bitterness. He wasn't nostalgic for tradition. He simply named what no one else dared to say. We are walking through a world of mirrors, constantly changing our reflection, but losing any sense of what stands behind the glass. In solid modernity and the world of our grandparents, life moved slower, but it held. People stayed in the same job for decades. Marriage was a commitment, not a contract. Beliefs were passed down, not reinvented every few months. There were limits, but there was also structure. Now, we swipe past people faster than we can know them. We curate selves for screens. We chase experiences instead of building foundations. Freedom has become weightless. And in that weightlessness we feel unanchored. Liquid modernity tells us to keep moving, to stay flexible, to avoid attachment, to keep all options open. But here's the paradox. When everything becomes possible, nothing feels meaningful. Bauman's theory is not just sociological, it's emotional. It explains the fatigue of endless choice, the numbness of always updating your identity, the quiet dread of a life in motion but without depth. So what's the cost of living in a liquid world? Connection becomes transaction, identity becomes content, freedom becomes a burden, intimacy becomes risk, and the result? A quiet, spreading emptiness, not dramatic, not catastrophic, but constant, like low-grade static humming beneath our lives. That's the core of Bauman's insight. Modern life isn't too hard, it's too fluid, and when nothing holds, the soul begins to slip through the cracks. We feel empty not because we're doing life wrong, but because the world has forgotten how to hold anything. To understand how Bauman reached this insight and what it means for us today, we need to explore the thinkers who warned us long before the emptiness became normal. Zygmunt Bauman didn't create the idea of modern emptiness, but he may have described it more clearly than anyone else. He didn't scream, he didn't moralize. He observed and gave us language for what we were too overwhelmed to name. Let's walk through the pillars of his thought and the thinkers who stood beside him in warning us. Bauman's liquid modernity. Bauman described our age as liquid, where structures that once held society together have melted. In previous eras, identities were inherited. You were born into religion, nation, gender roles, tradition. They were heavy, sometimes oppressive, but they anchored you. In liquid modernity, we're free. But freedom is no longer a gift, it's an obligation. We must choose what to believe, who to be, how to appear, over and over again. Bauman writes, "In a liquid modern life there are no permanent bonds, and thus the burden of keeping relationships going falls entirely on individuals. Nothing binds us, which means everything depends on us. And that weight, it breaks people quietly. The rise of the consumer self. Bauman believed that people today don't just consume products, they become products. You don't just wear clothes, you build an aesthetic. You don't just work, you brand yourself. The modern self is a marketplace, optimized, sold, discarded, replaced. And the tragedy? In a society of consumers, the ultimate fear is not death, but becoming irrelevant. We are taught to be desirable, not real. Liquid love. Liquid relationships. Bauman saw relationships as another casualty of liquid life. In a world obsessed with flexibility and risk aversion, love becomes fragile. People want connection without cost, intimacy without vulnerability, passion without permanence. So we swipe, we ghost, we vibe instead of commit. Love is no longer a binding force. It's a temporary agreement between two anxieties. And when those bonds break, we don't mourn, we move on. Because mourning would require stillness, and liquid life has no time for that. From Durkheim to Board, echoes of the liquid world. Bauman wasn't alone. Erich Fromm warned in Escape from a freedom that modern individuals overwhelmed by choice often flee into conformity. We are free, but we don't know what to do with it. Instead of creating meaning, we consume it. We join trends, pick labels, repost beliefs. But deep down, we're terrified of the empty space that freedom leaves behind. Emil Durkheim, over a century ago, called this emptiness anomie, the breakdown of social norms and the rise of personal aimlessness. He found that suicide rates increased when societies rapidly modernized, not from poverty, but from disconnection. People need boundaries. They need belonging. When those dissolve, despair rises. Guy Debord, in Society of the Spectacle, said we no longer experience reality. We consume its representation. We watch people live instead of living. We post to be seen, not to be known. And gradually we become strangers to ourselves, obsessed with how we appear while forgetting how to be. The core thread, speed without substance. Bauman, Fromm, Durkheim, De Boer, they all saw it coming. A world that moves faster, but means less, where emotion is aesthetic, connection is convenience, freedom is pressure, and selfhood is an app update. Bauman didn't hate modernity. He simply asked, what happens to the human soul when it has nowhere to rest? His answer wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, measured, devastating. It floats. But this floating isn't abstract. It's real. It happens every day. In how we date, how we work, how we scroll, how we relate, and it's in those details that Bauman's warnings come fully alive. You don't need to read Bauman to feel Bauman. You live him. Every time you ghost someone without explanation, every time you refresh your feed hoping for meaning, every time a friendship dissolves, without a fight, without a goodbye, just silence. We're not facing war, famine, or collapse. We're facing something quieter, but maybe more dangerous. The slow erosion of connection. The gentle disappearance of depth. Let's break down how Bauman's liquid modernity has already become our default reality. Liquid love. The death of romantic commitment. Dating apps promise connection, but they deliver choice. An endless buffet of faces and bios. And with infinite options comes zero weight. Why invest deeply when the next best thing is one swipe away? Why endure discomfort when you can vanish with no explanation? This is liquid love. Flexible, frictionless, unanchored. Relationships in liquid modernity are seen less as lasting commitments and more like shopping decisions. Temporary, replaceable. People aren't more selfish, they're more afraid. Afraid of entanglement, of staying too long, of becoming real. Because in a world that moves fast, depth feels like a risk, not a reward. Liquid identity. You are your profile. Social media turned selfhood into performance. We no longer ask, who am I? We ask, what will get likes? What will trend? What will offend the least? Bauman saw this early. In liquid modernity, the self becomes a task, a project that must be constantly updated, polished, and marketed. We build ourselves online, filter by filter, caption by caption, until we're not sure what's left underneath. Our identity becomes a performance, and when the audience stops clapping, we don't just lose attention, we lose ourselves. Liquid work, the hustle that never ends. The gig economy promised freedom, flexibility, autonomy. But what we got was insecurity. There's no job for life, no loyalty, no structure. You're always on, always pitching, always one algorithm update away from irrelevance. This is liquid labor, work without ground, value without rest. Even rest becomes productivity, even hobbies become content. In Bauman's world, you don't just have to be competent, you have to be visible, engaged, and optimizing 24/7. Liquid attention, infinite stimulation, no satisfaction. We live in a state of constant scroll. Information never ends. Opinions flood our minds. We jump from trend to trend, topic to topic, disaster to disaster. And the effect? We're informed, but exhausted. Connected, but disoriented. Stimulated, but emotionally flatlined. Bauman saw this as a form of liquid fear, not fear, of physical threat but of becoming invisible. We fear stillness because in stillness, well, we might have to feel. Liquid community. Belonging. Without bond, modern community is a click. A like, a subreddit, a group chat. But where is the binding? We have micro-identities, but no shared myth, no rituals, no emotional infrastructure. People say they feel alone, even in rooms full of people, even in group chats that never go quiet. Because true connection requires time, vulnerability, endurance, and liquid life doesn't allow it. The result? A culture of quiet collapse. So what happens? Friendships dissolve silently. Burnout is worn as a badge. Anxiety is normalized. Identity becomes elastic. Love becomes a transaction, and the soul, it adapts by numbing. Bauman didn't say we were doomed. He said we were untethered, floating. And in our rush to escape heaviness, we may have lost what gave life its weight: shared purpose, meaningful constraint, deep time, true belonging. But if this is what liquid life does to the world around us, what is it doing to us internally, to our sense of self, our psychology, our ability to know who we are beneath all the flow? Zygmunt Bauman warned us that in a liquid world, it's not just society that melts, it's the self. You don't just lose your roots, you lose your reflection, not in a dramatic crash, but in the quiet drip of meaning leaking from the bottom of everything. Let's look at what happens inside the mind when life becomes fluid. Identity as performance. In solid modernity, your identity was given. Your role in the family. Your religion, your town, your tradition. It could be oppressive, but it was anchored. In liquid modernity, identity is a project. Not something you are, something you build, polish, and sell. You become the marketer of your own personality. You edit your opinions to match the algorithm. You adjust your personality to match your audience. You self-surveil in public, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Bauman said, "When the self is a commodity, the fear isn't of death, it's of becoming unsellable." The result, you look confident, but feel like a ghost in your own body. The anxiety of endless choice is freedom, until it becomes paralysis. In a liquid world, nothing is fixed. Everything is customizable. Your gender, your career, your relationship style, your diet, your purpose. But this means the responsibility is always yours, and every decision feels like a referendum on your worth. What if I pick the wrong job? What if I love the wrong person? What if I waste my one wild and precious life? The pressure to get it right becomes unbearable. So we stay in motion, never committing, never grounding, never choosing. Because choosing feels like losing all other options. This is the curse of liquid freedom. Emotional numbness. As survival, you weren't built to feel this much, this fast, and this often. The news cycles, the notifications, the updates, the ambient chaos. So your nervous system adapts. You don't cry as much, you don't feel as much, you don't respond, you scroll. Numbness becomes your baseline. Because emotional stillness, the kind required for depth, feels unsafe in a liquid world. Stillness means confrontation, and confrontation means pain, so instead, you float. Fragmentation of the self. In Jungian psychology, the self is meant to be integrated, a union of your roles, desires, fears, values, and dreams. But in liquid life, we're trained to be fragmented. You're one person at work, another online, another in private, another in your head. You become a collage of masks, none of which truly know each other. And slowly, the center collapses, not in a breakdown. In something scarier, hollow functionality. You do everything right, but nothing feels like you, because you don't know who you is anymore. The shadow of liquid living. Jung warned, what we suppress becomes the shadow. And in a liquid world, we suppress depth, stillness, dependence, vulnerability, commitment. So those needs don't disappear, they become shadows. Loneliness masked as independence, rage masked as detachment, grief masked as humor, desire masked as irony, and that inner pressure builds, quietly, daily. Until one day, you can't remember what real connection felt like. You only remember the performance. Bauman didn't speak the language of the psyche, but his work described its unraveling. A world without anchors creates minds without centers, and in the absence of structure, the soul floats, not peacefully, but anxiously. So how does this liquid reality echo in today's culture? in our memes, our apps, our mantras. How do we disguise this despair, even as it defines our time? Look around. Bauman's liquid world isn't coming. It's here, disguised as culture, humor, hustle, and self-care. Modern life doesn't deny the emptiness. It just repackages it into products, into trends, into noise. Let's explore how liquid modernity now echoes through everything we do. Meme culture and irony as armor. We laugh about being dead inside. We share memes about not having a personality anymore. We joke about social anxiety, identity confusion, detachment, not to heal it, but to cope with it. This isn't humor. It's camouflage. In a world where nothing feels safe to hold, we wrap our pain in irony. If I don't take it seriously, maybe it won't hurt. Bauman would call this liquid fear, the fear of investing in anything stable, because stability now feels fragile. Wellness as distraction. Even so, healing has become liquid. Mindfulness is marketed like caffeine. Meditation is sold as productivity. Yoga is filtered through aesthetic, not spirit. We don't feel to heal. We optimize our feelings. And in doing so, we reinforce the very systems that keep us anxious, performative, and untethered. True healing requires slowness, and slowness is the one thing this world refuses to allow. Hyper-individualism. We're told that every answer is within us. You do you. Find your truth. No one owes you anything. But Bauman warned, this kind of extreme self-reliance isn't freedom, it's isolation. Yes, we've escaped conformity, but at the cost of community. And now, we're hyper-aware of our uniqueness, but starving for shared experience. Identity as infinite filter. We used to ask, who am I? Now we ask, how do I present myself today? From bio updates to personal brands to curated content, our sense of self is constantly shifting. This isn't evolution, it's exhaustion. Bauman predicted this. In a liquid world, identity is no longer a given. It becomes a task, a job, a never-ending performance, and we wonder why we feel tired all the time. Freedom, that feels like pressure. We're told to be flexible, adaptable, fluid. But inside we crave roots direction. Something that stays in Bauman's world. The irony is this: the more freedom we're given, the less freedom we feel. Because freedom without structure becomes responsibility without support. And that leads to burnout of the soul. Modern life tells us to move fast, reinvent constantly, feel nothing too deeply. But beneath the filters, the trends, the hustle, something ancient still whispers. I want to feel. I want to know. I want something that lasts. So where do we go from here? If Bauman diagnosed the sickness of our age, is there still space for healing, for anchoring, for meaning, in a world that refuses to stand still? So here we are, drifting. Not because we're lazy, not because we're lost, but because the world beneath us never stops shifting. Zygmunt Bauman didn't offer us solutions. He didn't tell us to go backward or forward. He simply handed us some mirrors and asked, can a soul stay whole in a world that never stays still? In liquid modernity, everything flows. Love, identity, work, truth. But you don't have to. You don't have to float just because the world does. You don't have to dilute yourself to be accepted. You don't have to fear depth, even when the world runs from it. In fact, in a liquid age, depth becomes rebellion. Stillness becomes strength. Commitment becomes clarity. Honesty becomes sacred. You don't need a grand ideology. You need an anchor, something that says, this is who I am, even when the world forgets. This is what I believe, and even when it's inconvenient. This is what I hold on to, even when everything else lets go. And that anchor? It won't come from outside. It won't be handed to you. It won't be trending. It will come quietly from the space you create inside yourself. Bauman didn't ask us to resist the future. He asked us to remain human within it. to stop outsourcing our identity, to stop mistaking motion for meaning, to stop living like our lives are temporary files, waiting to be overwritten by the next update. Because if everything flows, then the ones who choose to stay still, to go deep, to build roots, to commit, they don't drown. They become landmarks. So here's the final question. What would it look like? To stop floating? To stop performing? To choose one thing, one value, one truth, one relationship, and let it hold you, even as the world moves on? Because in a liquid world, meaning doesn't come from finding more. It comes from holding on to what matters most, long enough for it to become real.